Hello and welcome to Art, Life, and Faith. My name is Joey O'Connor and I'm the Executive Director of the Grove Center for the Arts and Media. And today you're in for a special treat. I'll be interviewing Nick Macedo. Nick is a slam poet. He's a writer. And I had the chance of meeting Nick about a year ago. I was at a fundraiser banquet and Nick was performing. It was for a Young Life event. And I had never heard of Nick, had never seen Nick perform. But when I did, I was absolutely blown away at the incredible talent this young man had. And I said to myself, I've got to meet this guy because he's remarkable. I had never seen someone perform with such power and eloquence and a use of words that was really mesmerizing. I just loved so much how Nick could string together thoughts and words and ideas, things that I had felt before, but I had never really been to articulate. And so today, as I talk to Nick Macedo, you're in for a great surprise because you're going to be encouraged, especially if you like poetry, if you're interested in slam poetry. Once Nick and I got the chance to sit down and have coffee, I said to him, Nick, I don't know how this is all going to work out, but I would really love to encourage you in your creative journey, and I'd love to see you write more, but I wasn't sure how to do that. And so within about 6 months, I found a platform called the Book platform, which integrates ebook technology with video and written word and all sorts of interactive web links. And so Nick and I together, along with our graphic designer, Nikki Augustin, we ended up creating Nick's first ebook called Sound of a Spine, and it's poetry and performance by Nick Macedo. It's an enhanced video ebook. It's optimized here for the iPad, and you're going to want to get a copy about that. We'll tell you later on how you can do that. But before I go any further, I want to introduce Nick and enjoy this conversation with him today. Nick, how you doing?
I'm doing good, man. How you doing?
Great. Well, as you know, and as I've told you the past year, it's been such a pleasure to get to know you, and I so admire the talent that God has given you and the remarkable gifts. I've been able to see you perform a few different times. But what I want our listeners today to just hear from you is that how did you get started in slam poetry, and what was the whole beginning of your creative journey?
Oh gosh. Well, I watched a lot of professional wrestling as a kid, and so I found out
Nice.
that one night I was sitting in my bedroom and I found out my favorite professional wrestler, a guy named Jeff Hardy, wrote poetry, and I thought, well, if he can, so can I. And so I made my first poetry binder that night and wrote my first poem that evening. I think I actually spent more time building the binder than I did on writing the actual poem, but it looked good. And, so did that, and that was in 8th grade. I was, 14 at the time. I'm 25 now, and, it was a hobby that stuck for the next several years until, one thing led to another, and I got introduced to an artisan retreat up in the mountains called Terra Nova, and that led to my awareness of a place in Hollywood, California called the Poetry Lounge, which just happens to be the longest running poetry venue in the country. It's been around. It'll be celebrating its 14th birthday next week, I believe, actually. And so that led me to that. And so anyway, one night I was at the lounge, and a lady shared a poem, and then she said, "Hey, we have another venue in Leimert Park, Los Angeles." I didn't even know where that was. And she goes, we're putting together a team. It's the last qualifying team. We're going to send the team to the National Poetry Slam. And I didn't know what any of that meant. But she came up to me afterwards and asked if I would come out and compete for the team. She had seen me read that night, and I said, yeah, maybe. And I turned around and I had a few friends that were like, "You're going," and I didn't even know what slam was. But I went out and I didn't qualify. But I got the call back the next week because someone dropped out, and so just by default, I got bumped up. And so I was at work when I got the phone call, and I drove. It was I think 6:30, and I was working at Starbucks, and I printed up poems and memorized poems while I was driving, which I don't ever recommend doing. And and got up there, and it ended up going to like a double tiebreaker. So luckily I had printed up extra poems to read, and I ended up making it into the finals. And when the dust settled after finals, I ended up coming in second place. I beat a 10-year veteran by 1/10 of a point, and lost to another 10-year veteran by another 10th of a point. And that was my first slam team. That was back in 2010, and so I literally accidentally fell into what I do in a lot of ways.
Well, and I should have mentioned in the introduction that for you being 25 years old, what most people don't realize or don't know is that you're really one of the top spoken word poets in Hollywood, and you've had an incredible string of success at a very young age. And I'm really interested for our listeners to know, what is your life like now as a slam poet? What do you do? Where do you perform? What is that life like?
Oh, well, in addition to, I've performed at all the major poetry venues throughout Southern California, as well as, I recently just performed at a conference at Azusa Pacific called the FAM Conference, that a guy, Doug Fields and Jim Burns put together. It's like conferences, and I've literally performed at all kinds of different venues and living rooms, and I just like telling stories. And so it's kind of, as a part of that journey, it's definitely been a localized one, but then additionally, it's taken me outside the state. I mean, I performed in 2 national poetry slams in St. Paul, Minnesota, and Boston, Massachusetts, respectively. I performed in an individual World Poetry Slam, which was held in Cleveland, Ohio last year, and I just recently performed at my first NACA conference, which stands for National Association of Campus Activities, and they're one of the main associations responsible for booking entertainment that travels around to universities. So guys like Dane Cook or Jason Mraz, all different art forms, have gotten their start through NACA, and I recently just did my first NACA festival and booked a string of dates that I'll be touring back in the East Coast in the fall, like Pennsylvania, Maryland, Massachusetts, New York, New Jersey. And I just get to go around and share my stories and meet people and hear theirs, and it's really been a wonderful experience. So I mean, as far as where I get to go around and the areas I get to reach, it's really been quite fun.
That's great. You and I had the chance a few months ago to spend a few days ago at the Grove Center for the Arts and Media, the nonprofit I run. I took you and a couple other guys away for a writer's retreat, and I remember one of the things that you said during one of our conversations. It was really a powerful statement, and I'll probably butcher it a little bit here, but you talked about, I was asking you about your creative process, and you talked about listening to both the outer conversation and the inner conversation going on around you. And talk a little bit about that. Tell me about your creative process. I think that what you said there would be really helpful for some of the artists and creative people listening to this interview. What do you mean by that? Yeah,
well, I mean, I for me, it's particularly relevant when it comes to poems and storytelling and things like that, though I think that it applies to all art forms, and that is, I'm a real big believer that there's always 2 conversations happening. There's a conversation that's going on internally, and that might be anything from stresses that I have going on in life, something that I'm feeling inside, whether it's, related to family or friends or business or whatever the case may be. There's always an internal conversation going on, whether it's happiness or frustration or stress or whatever. And then additionally, I believe there's always an external conversation going on. So there's a conversation that is happening between me and my bedroom that I'm in right now. My bed looks very inviting at the moment. It was a late night, and I'm not used to being up. I probably shouldn't say that. It's 11:15, but so there's that conversation that goes on externally, whether I'm in a bedroom, whether I'm out and about in nature. I think that's one of the reasons that artists tend to find nature so inspiring, is because the conversation is very, very loud if you're sitting next to the ocean, or you're sitting, out in the desert or in the woods or something to that. Whereas the conversation might sound a bit more static if you're sitting next to a freeway. So there's those 2 conversations, and I think good art comes when you as the artist can listen to what's going on with the internal conversation, what is happening with the external conversation, and what's that third conversation they're having with each other. So how is what's outside bouncing off what's going on in me inside? And I think for me, that's kind of where my creative process as far as storytelling and things like that comes from. But I think that it's a pertinent thing to observe regardless of art form: paint, graphic design, dance, anything. I mean, there's always multiple conversations.
That's great. That's a great insight. Nick, for the person that's listening to this conversation today, perhaps they're a young artist, maybe it's someone who stopped writing years ago or who always had an interest in poetry. Regardless of someone's age, what would you say to someone who's really thinking about, how do I lean into this creative inkling, this gift of writing that I have? What would you say to them to encourage them to take some risks and to really work on practicing their craft and honing it?
Don't be afraid to fail. People always go, "Oh my God, you're such a great writer. You always probably produce, great poems." And it's like, the poems that I share are the ones that are like they're the ones that rise to the top. I mean, the majority of the things that I write never see the light of day. They either go into a dead space folder on my computer or they just get deleted, because you have to be afraid to not fail, to not write poorly, or not. You have to be afraid. Not be afraid to create poor art, because it's going to happen, and it's just part of the process. I mean, that's why a band like Coldplay can go into the studio and they write and record maybe 12 or 13 tracks, but in the process for writing that album, they actually will tell you in an interview that they wrote 27 songs or 33 songs or like 33 ideas. They may have not become full songs, right, but they were. They were part of that process, and they just chose the top 10 or 11 to include on the album, and it becomes a gold record. But the reality is there was 20 other songs that were not good enough that they would even feel proud sharing with anyone outside of the band. And I think similarly, it's the same regardless of art form. So my encouragement would be to anyone who's looking to get into writing or just some art form in general, right, or maybe is looking to return to an art form. It's don't feel like you have to produce gold all the time. Anne Lamott, one of my favorite authors. I don't know if you've read her at all, but sure. She has a book called Bird by Bird, and it's instructions on faith and writing. And I think it's maybe even the first chapter in the book. It's called Shitty First Drafts, yep, and it just talks about the fact that like everything you do is not going to be gold, and you have to mine through a lot of coal before you're going to find a diamond. And it's not necessarily the most glamorous work, but
that's true.
It's beautiful though. So
yeah. That's great advice. Nick, tell me, how can people get in contact with you? Perhaps they want you to perform at an event that they're going to have, or just talk to you. Hey, how do people get a hold of you?
The easiest place is probably my website. That's nickmacedopoetry.com, NICKMACEDO poetry.com. All my contact info is on there. You can reach me at nick@mossvox.com. That's MASVOX, mossvox.com. Or you can find me on Facebook, facebook.com/nickmacedo. It's probably the easiest way. Those are probably the three most pertinent ways.
Perfect. And we do want to remind people, we really want to encourage you to support Nick in his work. Pick up a copy of Sound of a Spine, Poetry and Performance of Nick Macedo. You can download it onto your iPad or to your Nook reader, a Kindle. It's available in iBook Store, Barnes & Noble Nook, Amazon. You're going to see an incredibly dynamic video ebook where there's about 8 videos of Nick performing, as well as a number of his poems. And you're going to find this video ebook platform quite amazing. And so I really want to encourage you to pick up a Sound of a Spine. Nick, it's been great talking with you today. Really appreciate your words of input and encouragement to artists, and I just wish you great success in the coming days.
Thanks, Joey. I appreciate you having me this morning, man.
Okay, buddy. Take care.
You too.